Hi everyone, welcome to People Watch, the official podcast of the People Management Association of the Philippines. Here, there are no motherhood statements, no hiding behind obsolete theories and adages, and no time to beat around the bush. Just real talk with real people.
Now let's get the ball rolling. Again, this month's topic is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And joining us to talk about this subject is our esteemed guest, Mr. EJ Zara. EJ is the managing director of the Resource Hat and a consultant trainer for Breakthrough Leadership Management Consulting Incorporated. He is also a professor of practice for the Golden Gate University in San Francisco, California. EJ honed his human resource business planning and business development capabilities via his 5 years of corporate experience in a leading semiconductor company and his 10 years in a top financial multinational company here in the Philippines. EJ graduated with honors for a degree in Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of the Philippines. He was awarded the Silver Medal for Academic Excellence when he completed his master's degree in Business Administration from the Ateneo de Manila, and in 2022, he got his PhD in Leadership and Organizational Development from the Ateneo Loyola Schools. EJ was awarded his certification for Executive and Life Coaching by the American Management Association and is currently pursuing a professional coach certification by the International Coaching Federation. Welcome, EJ.
Hey, Cecille, thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. I always feel a bit awkward when I hear my introduction because at the end of everything, I'm just a human being. Is that right, Cecille?
Yes, but a human being with much accomplishment.
Which I'd like to share today. So thank you again for inviting me for this particular live session.
We are honored to have you, EJ. And I'm very excited to pick your brains. But before we dive into this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, maybe we can talk about and give our participants a clearer picture of what really it means to say diversity, equity, inclusion in our workplace. What's the difference between these three concepts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cecil, for that. And I always get a lot of questions as regards these differences. And of course, there are also different frameworks as regards differentiating these three, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how I would like to define that actually, of course, is to chunk them up into what diversity is versus how it is then when we talk about inclusion, and then how it is that we talk about equity. And I also cannot, of course, take out my academic PhD background in terms of like defining it from an academic and research perspective. So let me start with that. Let me start with defining what diversity is. And I'm getting this from a 2009 article by Gonzalez and DC. And they wrote this in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. And I find this definition like really spot on in terms of just really that word diversity. So they say that diversity is actually the mosaic of people. So it's a mosaic of people who bring a variety of backgrounds, styles, perspectives, values, and beliefs as assets, right? As assets to the groups and organizations with which they interact, right? And I like how they frame it. I framed it because it talks about how these variety of background styles and perspectives actually should be a contributory factor in the success of an organization in which they actually are in. And they also mentioned that diversity is the difference or differences between individuals on any personal attributes that determine how people perceive one another. And so these differences are based really on how different we are as human beings, how different we are in terms of our knowledge, skills, and attitudes, how different we are in terms of our educational backgrounds, and all of those other factors that make us different, like culture, for instance. And of of course, those differences determine how we perceive one another. And that perception of each other is where I guess inclusion can come in, because the perception is inevitably, of course, going to be very different from a stance of you having your own, well, judgments, right? So that's diversity there. And inclusion is, of course, making sure that people, no matter how different they are with you, from you rather, you're including them on the table. You're like making sure that everybody is included. And that's kind of hard to do because, again, these differences among individuals create some biases, and some of these biases are even unconscious. And just really to be candid to you about this, Cecil, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that a lot of us are still trying to journey into, because this particular concept in the corporate world is, well, we're not familiar with this as much as, the Western, I guess, business environment has already been like doing this for quite a while. But here, at least in the Philippines, it's still quite new with us. And yeah, so we're still journeying through it. And so the definitions actually is all about Western definitions. I wish that I could
That's
speak
right.
of an academic research already on diversity, equity, inclusion, but we don't have much yet. So we're still reliant on definitions from a Western perspective. Cecil?
That's right, EJ. Yeah. Would you say, when you said earlier that we are at a young age, would you say we're at an infantile stage or intermediate stage already in this concepts? Because you are very right here. There's a lot of our companies here in the Philippines already getting into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet, the policies and the programs set for these are at very young stages.
That's right. And I think we need to understand that this concept is still a journey for all of us, right? It's still up for a lot of experimentation, I guess. There's still a lot of things that we need to acquaint ourselves in terms of like even definitions from a cultural perspective, like from a Philippine context. How is this going to be, right? Because when you talk about diversity, for instance, Cecil, if I may be candid with everybody, some people think that it's just about, let's say, I don't know, gender or
Yes.
generational differences or even culture. But diversity is a multifaceted phenomenon. I mean, even the color of hair is part of diversity. Even, of course, educational background, even your Gallup strengths indicators, even, these are all within that space of how different we are from each other. And much so that sometimes when we talk about diversity, we actually look into it as a space of acknowledging differences, right? Whereas in the real bigger perspective of diversity, Cecil, it also looks into, and I suppose that this is something that we need to journey through still, would be the similarity of how we are, right? Because when you talk about diversity, immediately probably top of mind would be how different we are from each other. But diversity is not that. I mean, diversity is looking into how different we are from each other, yet it also speaks about how similar we are from each other. And I think that aspect is still something that we need to like look into and quote unquote mature into, I guess, if I may use that word.
Yes. Yes, that's a great insight, actually, EJ. The understanding that diversity is talking about not only the differences, but yes, our similarities and how to make it really work so that we are working well together. Earlier, you mentioned how the differences in each one, and then how they are going to merge together and make that work for the company as well, right? And what do you think, EJ, is the importance of organizations really also putting attention on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Okay, that's a very good question because, of course, as we journey through this, we also have different perspectives as far as whether our organizations are actually like ready for them, right? And again, sometimes I say that it doesn't have to be like really huge steps for now, right? It can be little steps in terms of how organizations can actually like really put together uh, a diversity policy, or let's look at hiring, for instance, right? Let's look at hiring, for instance. And there are a lot of things to unpack when we hire somebody, right? Of course, we look into schools, we look into experience, right? We look into, let's say, how many times he has jumped from one company to another, right? Sometimes we are as human as taking a look into, is he or she, um, and I want to be politically correct about this, visually appealing, that they will fit into the visual appeal of the entire team, right? And I hope that I was very politically correct when I phrase that, right? And these are all human being stuff. I mean, we need to not judge the judger in terms of these things, because these are human being stuff, right? Like, I always tell my participants in DEI, I mean, is it really possible for us not to judge? And I guess that's really also a human being thing to like really judge. Yet, to your question, I guess a lot of self-awareness there, right? So, for instance, you have like 3 candidates, and then you choose one, right? We need to be more vigilant in terms of asking ourselves, why did I choose this person? What is it about this person that I see that is really fitting for this particular job, right? Is there any unconscious bias that I am exhibiting towards the other two? And these things, Cecil, they don't need some, I guess, organizational process change or policy making, right? It's really about, as an individual and as a leader and as, a hiring person, for particularly on a person-to-person thing, we need to look into how we practice inclusion, how we view diversity, how we make people like feel that they're all equal in terms of these opportunities. And that's equity, by the way, right? Like giving equal opportunities to people, and that's equity, by the way, right? So, to your question, little by little, organizations can like put in some policies as regards diversity, inclusion, and equity. But I guess central to being leaders, just an awareness, just some discussions and meaningful conversations about it would be probably good for now. And let's see how that actually ripples out and pans out in terms of day-on-day decisions that we have in the workplace.
EJ, do you think this evolution of values, because I think that's what it boils down to, right? The evolution of values of the people working in the organization, fostering that sense of inclusivity and diversity. Do you think this is best done top down or bottom up?
Oh my goodness, that's a very good question. Okay, so championing this is going to be really making a big difference. So from a top-down perspective, championing this, and how leaders are, they role models, right? And people look up to us as leaders in terms of like, can he actually do this? Does he actually practice this as well, right? So I guess a top-down approach is always like really a good idea in terms of like pushing things that are somehow equate to behavioral change within the organization, because leaders are the ones that, leaders are big factors in creating a culture of, acceptance and inclusion within, your particular organization. So a message of, clarity as regards this is of course necessary, yet execution is within, where we are and at the groundwork of things, right? It can be that leaders will push for this and say that okay, let's all be aware of our unconscious biases. But the implementation of this, how we treat each other on the ground and how we treat each other, let's say day on day, will actually, also build that culture up, right? So I don't know if you can give me like some time for an example, for instance. And you know how it is. I mean, I was speaking to my participants this morning because I ran a workshop this morning for a top FMCG company. And so you know how it is when somebody is, let's say, and we were talking about safe spaces, right? And so, and that's part of, psychological safety within the space of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we came into that discussion that sometimes we are unconscious. For instance, that if we are in a brainstorming session and a person came up with like a very good idea, and this person happened to be, let's say, really a star in the team and, a performer, etc. It's easy to like really tell that person, okay, so this is like, and I'm not sure if we can speak Filipino here, Tagalog, but because it's really how it is. I mean, we speak in Tagalog sometimes, and in the workplace we say, ito na naman si bida-bida, right? Ito na naman si bida-bida, right? So those kinds of, banters within teams, we need to actually also look into them and see, okay, so I know that that's just really a joke, but how persistent is that demonstrated within the team, so much so that it becomes like a culture, looking at people that way. Like whenever people say something, they say that you are bida bida. Will that connect to them still being in safe spaces, or will that like silence them? So next time I won't say anything because I'm just gonna be tagged as, bida bida. So those things are like, day on day stuff, which is within the space of diversity, inclusion, and equity.
Yeah, EJ, it's maybe because we are at a very young stage for these concepts here in the Philippines. You're right. We leaders have to be really careful also on how they proceed or how they talk in the office. I've had incidents where someone would, because you know how the pronouns go, right? The they and them, and somebody said they are coming. And this one of the managers go, who's they? How many are they? And the thing is, the pronoun is they, right? So even that, if people do find that offensive as well, so there's a lot. It's a long way. There's a long way for us to go, right? But with all of this, I'd say we're still doing birth pains. I think. Would you agree, EJ? Birth pains ba tayo?
Well, actually, I'd like to call it journeying through.
Journeying through. So as we journey through, ano ba talaga? What are the key benefits of fostering a diverse and inclusive workforce?
Okay, so of course there are a lot of studies that have actually looked into the benefits of a diverse workforce, and okay, so one such thing, for instance, would be, let's say, well, of course, this is diversity and inclusion is more about like gender, but let's talk about that gender thing for now, right? So there was data and collected from LinkedIn, Bloomberg, and other open data sources. And this was curated by the Philippines' e-commerce market. They analyzed this on a sort of like a group mapping of e-commerce in terms of like a study in 2018. And they found out that in the C-levels and the C-suite levels of leadership, there were 79% of them were males, and only 21% of them are females, right? In the C-suite levels of leadership. Whereas in the SVP levels, it's kind of equal, 56% for males and 44% for females, right? And we're doing such like a, we're doing so much better compared to our, let's say, neighboring Asian countries like Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore and even Hong Kong and even like Vietnam. Here in the Philippines, we're more open to having women leaders. But of course, if you look into the stats, 79% males and 21% females in the C-suite level is kind of like telling us that there's still a lot of space for, let's say, women leaders, for instance, to get into C-suite levels of leadership. I'm a good friend of somebody who's like in that space of women leadership, and she said that there are the 21% is translates to about only 54 women leaders CEO in the Philippines. So there are only 54 CEO leaders in the Philippines, and of course these are in the beauty industry, some in the FMCG, right? But when you talk about, let's say, tech companies, startup companies, most of them really are, of course, male. And I guess I need to also set aside some biases as regards that, because tech does not necessarily have to be like male-driven or male-dominated, but it is just how things flow, right? When you're in tech, then male CEO. But if you're in beauty, then it's just like really women, right? And these are also telling of, okay, so where are we in terms of how we view industries and who's at the top level of that particular company, right? So if we're going to talk about, let's say, heads, right, like team heads, team leads, right, this is where the stats shifts, because when you talk about team lead levels, 62% are females, 38% are males. But why is it that as you move up the ladder, and this is what the data is showing from this 2018 study, why is it that as you move up, there's also sort of like an erosion of females getting into that top level? So that's something that we need to also take a look into, right? And so one of the benefit, of course, would be to look into more like, is there a bias there, right? Is there a bias there? And if there's a bias there, how is it affecting that particular company?
Why do you think we need to really promote this diversity in the workplace, EJ? Status quo, you're right. There's more male than female in the C-suite levels, right? For example, in our industry, there are less women welders than male welders. I think we have 10 to 15%. And normally, other companies would not even want to hire women welders. But in our case, we find that the women welders are more careful and have better products sometimes. So, overall, why do you think diversity is important for every business?
Yeah. Okay. And so there's another study which I am looking into now. This is from Diversity and Inclusiveness is Good for Your Well-Being by Psychology Today. They say that diverse relationships increase employee performance and well-being. By how much? Professionals with a diverse network are 4 times more likely to have high well-being than those who do not. And there is a 20% increase in performance amongst employees who talk to their colleagues in person throughout the day. And it says here that leaders who encourage personal connections have more committed, satisfied, and of course, productive workers. So diverse relationships really increase employee performance and well-being. 4 times more likely, right, to have high well-being than those who do not. And of course, high well-being right now, particularly after the pandemic, is very important for employee retention.
Yeah. Right? And could you repeat that for me, EJ? Did you say 40% increase in performance as well?
20% increase in performance.
20%. That's actually a big number. I'm thinking also when we say two heads are better than one, right? So maybe big contribution to that is that there are more people, more different points of views, ideas, and innovations too that can happen because of that, right? So it's really good. How about when we talk about equity, because that's
Mm,
another iffy subject. The truth is,
mm-hmm.
even with, if you notice, even with the C-suits, the leaders, it's true there's less women in the workplace at that level, but also they are paid less. Think, no, hindi lang nga, as we're talking about it kanina, it's not only applicable at work for us. It's in our day to day, with your example with your daughter, right? So, but we need an awareness, that we
Yeah.
need an awareness from this conversation, yeah, that we need an awareness of what is going on in the world today, in our lives, in our businesses, in the context of the Filipinos, the Filipino businesses, no, so that we can go from there in growing and understanding new concepts, in evolving with the times, and hopefully that these evolutions will make our businesses better. Hindi naman natin ginagawa lang to dahil gusto nating maki-jump in sa
Yeah.
trend, di ba?
Yeah.
We're doing this because we want to improve, we want to be ahead of the times, no? Although sabi nga natin we're a little bit more dehado in these concepts, we are really mabilis naman tayong mag-catch up na mga Pilipino. But the key is really that openness. And I love what you said, EJ, na, you have to be self-aware, no? To be self-aware, and you need to parang be kind to yourself. Meron ding inclusivity, meron ding safe space for
Yes.
ourselves.
Oh,
Where when we make a mistake, diba? It's okay, we dust ourselves off. If you need to apologize, apologize, right? But yeah, dust ourselves off and continue on doing what we can do towards this journey. Ano nga, a journey through. Tama ba,
we
EJ?
journey through. Yeah, we journey through.
I love that term, a journey through. No, and yes, we've seen many companies thrive, really thrive, embracing these concepts. And so good luck to all of us here na sana magawa natin ng tama ito, di ba? And that concludes our discussion. A big thank you to you, EJ, for sharing valuable your knowledge, your insights, and experiences with us, with our participants. It's really a pleasure to have had you here in the program. Thank you so much. And to all our viewers, we appreciate you all. Thank you for tuning in with us. Join us again next month for the latest topics and discussion in the people management world. Again, I'm Cecille Ramos Carlos, and this is People Manager on Com. Until next time, stay curious.